Welcome to episode 4 of All Guitars Buzz, the weekly guitar-centric podcast that dives into a variety of topics, including guitar repair, building, what's on my bench, guitar news worth mentioning, customer stories, buying, selling, trading, along with existential philosophical ramblings. If this sounds like something you would be into, please stick around. I have an email now, so if you want to weigh in and comment on some of the things I'm talking about, or if you would like to add anything or just want to get in contact with me in general, it's allguitarsbuzz@gmail.com. I'm playing a couple shows this month. I'm playing a place called Nate's Garden Grill. And if you are native to San Diego, you probably are familiar with this place. But if you are in even neighboring cities, if you're in LA, it's a cool spot to know about in San Diego. So Nate's Garden Grill is a city farm. It's a nursery. They have plants you can buy. There's animals there, livestock, and I even think they have like pottery classes. It's a very cool place, and they have a restaurant, and they make some of the most amazing food in San Diego. And I think they even source some of their greens and stuff from their garden, but it's an amazing restaurant. But what's even more amazing is they have live music there. I think at least 4 nights a week, or even, I shouldn't say just nights, because I usually play brunch on Sunday. So they have music during the day too, and really good musicians, if I might add. But anyways, you could eat some really good food, listen to music, drink mimosas, and then go on to the city farm and maybe buy a plant, pet some of the animals. So I've been doing that for like 8 years now, on and off, but for the past 3 years, pretty consistently, once or twice a month. So I'm playing there April 17th, 6 to 8, and this is 2026, by the way. And then I'm also playing a charity event on May 2nd. It's called Motor for Minds. And Motor for Minds is an annual San Diego firefighter-led car show charity dedicated to raising funds and awareness for first responders and mental health. This is the 4th annual event, and it's on Saturday, May 22nd, 2026 at El Monte Park in Lakeside. And it features cars, live music, that's me, food, family events. The proceeds benefit firefighter aid, providing mental health resources and training for firefighters. So it's a very cool event. Second time I've played it, and this is with my band Kenny Hill and the Echoes, and we play rockabilly country type stuff. So if you're free around that time, come check it out. It's a wicked cool event. We had an interesting week at my shop. Some of the things that rolled in for consignment, we have an SG with P90s, and I don't know the year. I should have been prepared with like what year the SG is, but I heard a customer say, "Oh, that's the older SG, right?" So it's an older one and has P90s. Gosh, does it have the vibrola? Baby. But anyways, that's a really cool one worth mentioning anyways. And another cool guitar that rolled in that we're still trying to figure out how much it's going to go for, but it's a 59 ES 330 TD. And this guitar at first glance is really minty, but it doesn't have the original pickguard, it doesn't have the case, a couple other things. I'll talk about it again a little later here. I've made pretty good progress in my shop, keeping busy with some stuff. I got more headway on my CNC. I have the alt mill 4x4, and it's been quite the process with trying to assemble it, because it comes in just a bunch of boxes from Canada, basically. And so there's a really good instructional video on how to install it, and there's also good documentation that gives further details on how to assemble it. And so I've been doing that, and I'm excited about my dive into the CNC world. I have been using the Shaper Origin for a long time now. It's basically like a smart router. Really interesting machine. You basically you design stuff in like Illustrator, and then you load it into this, and it looks like a router with like an iPhone like on top, and it has a camera and it can see. So what it does is you load the design into it, and then you lay down this domino type tape and you scan it. And basically, you're scanning the router's world. So now it knows where it's at in the world. And then you pick from the touchscreen your design, and you can place it. You hit place, and it lays it down where you want to cut it out. And you have your material, whether it be a pickguard or piece of wood, you have it down. And by the way, I show this in a few of my YouTube videos. And anyways, you can cut stuff out with it, and it's CNC accurate. So on the screen, it shows your design, and you just push the router towards the design, and it kind of feels like a video game. And if you drift off a few 30 seconds or whatever, it auto corrects. So you could cut out like puzzle pieces, and they'll fit. And it has offsets, and it has a lot of things that CNCs have. And it's been a cool tool, and I've been using it for a long time now, at least over 5 years. Probably closer to 6. And so that, it's really got me geared up and ready for the switch now to a CNC. So I'm going to be able to cut out guitar bodies and necks, which I'm super stoked on. So necks is just kind of, there's a learning curve to some of these CNC programs, and I want to make sure the one that I do is 3D, because you got to be careful. A lot of these programs that come with the CNCs, they are not full 3D. They can't do, like when you're talking about the back of a guitar neck, it can't do that curve in some of the transitions. So that's the difference. So that's very interesting. And then we have news on the Servicemen Strat epoxy guitar story. So basically, so now there's epoxy in the back cavity where the block is, and the springs and the claw and all that are, and there's some overspill. And so I set up 2 rails on the back of the body, and I dropped my router, and I put the bit on the part of the body that has no epoxy. Now, interestingly enough, this guitar, you could listen to episode, I think 1 or 2, where I talk about the beginnings of this project, but it was done by hand, probably in the Philippines, and it's not flat. Like, it wasn't done with a router, from what I can tell. And so even though I'm gonna use a router to take the epoxy that's become proud in that cavity, I'm gonna try to flatten it and make it even to the surface, flat to the surface. There's gonna be some low spots, and that's because the back isn't completely flat, if that makes sense. So I basically just described what happened. So yeah, but that went well though. So I routed the excess epoxy off, and it's more or less flat. There are some low spots, but I'm going to make a back plate that's routed into the body. So that's going to be cool. Yeah, just a little bit each week on that project. Not trying to rush it, but I am excited about it. And I had a lot of cool guitars on my bench this week, including a Taylor 214. Here in San Diego, we see a lot of Taylors. And so even guys in my shop used to work at this other shop in the 70s called American Dream. And in that shop was a lot of builders that went on to do great things, including my coworker. And so Bob Taylor, of course, went on to create Taylor guitars. And there's Deering. He was a part of the American Dream shop, I do believe. There's another guy named Sam Radding. He does Go guitars, so has a rich San Diego history. In fact, Taylor even came out with a series now called American Dream. So when you go and you try to look up, American Dream San Diego, just that Taylor guitar comes up. But anybody that was getting custom guitars done in the 70s knows the owner of my shop from that. That holds a lot of clout with a lot of people. And so as a result of Taylor guitars being San Diego based, they were in El Cajon for a long time, we see a lot of Taylor guitars. And so this is just another one that rolls in, and it needs a bridge reglue, 214. And what was interesting about this is the bridge was lifting a lot from the back. Like usually if you could get a Post-it note like inside it, like barely, like it's time. And this time it was like up like maybe a quarter of an inch or something. Like it was up, right? And so, but what this does mean is the bridge is probably warped now, right? So anyways, it actually wasn't easy coming off, and some are, some aren't. This one really wasn't. So I did use heat, and it took some persuading on my behalf, but I got it off, which was good news, and came off pretty cleanly, actually really cleanly. There was no patching or, sometimes the fibers detach and you got to glue them with a flat block. Nothing like that this time. But what was interesting and what I like that Taylor does is they have these like nylon locating pins on some of their bridges, and that's really useful. So you don't really need to put appropriately sized drill bits on the two E's to line up the bridge when clamping. They've got their own locating pins. Something else that was interesting is it had the expression system, and that the under the saddle was connected up by the knobs on the upper bout there, and you had to pull. It came with like one of those like 1/8 inch like headphone style jacks, and you had to pull it off the circuit board, which a circuit board, if you weren't careful, you could really break that. So that was tricky because, of course, you have to take the under the saddle out of the bridge when you're taking the bridge off. So that was something I had to do, but everything went well, and it turned out great. That was a good bridge reglue. Another one down. I had a Gretsch Electromatic on my bench for a setup. And I see a lot of Gretsches because people kind of know me as the Gretsch guy, which is interesting because, I'm always learning. I think other folks that are really into history know a lot more about the various models. Me, I've played a 6120 pretty much my whole career. Only recently have I started playing more solid body guitars. And so, I just know how to set them up, and I know what they need. And I'm used to working on them, but to be fair, their model numbers are kind of whack. There's like, they're especially with Electromatic. So when people say, oh, this variant or, that signature, sometimes I'll see Gretsches I've never seen before. Now this Electromatic, I couldn't tell if it was just, it wasn't a rat rod, but it had a lot of upgrades. It was either that or it was kind of a higher end Electromatic, even though it looked like an older one. Like all the knobs had been replaced with Gretsch, like metal knobs, and the switch tip was replaced with a, like a metal switch tip, and just the little details. The only thing, where besides it saying Electromatic is, the Bigsby said licensed, which by the way, those Bigsby suck. The licensed, there's a lot of flex in them. They're made out of poor metal. They're terrible. If you want a big upgrade on your Electromatic, put a real deal Bigsby on. Seriously. Now, there's a lot of little tweaks to Gretsch's. I could just go on, and as the cliche goes, it's mostly in the nut, right? Well, yeah, it's mostly in the nut. But also, the string saws into the Tunomatic bridge like a freaking saw. And when you work the arm of the Bigsby, you can kind of see the bridge rock back and forth. So there's lots of stuff happening. Of course, people put roller bridges on Gretsches, but if you finger pick like I do, the high E will pop right out of those all parts roller bridges, and a lot of the roller bridges actually. Even the Melita bridge, you could pop the high E out. There's not much of a break angle, so there's workarounds and there's things that you could do, and to pin or not pin the bridge, and or double stick it. There's so much to talk about when you talk about Gretsch setup, and maybe one day I'll do a video on that. But at least for this one, when it came in, I always write what all the specs of how it is when it came in and when it's going to leave. So ironically, I say that, and on the piece of paper in front of me, I don't have what it left with, but I could probably tell you what it left with, because it's always more or less the same depending on what the guitar can do. But it came in and it was about 80 to 70 thousand, so 80 on the bass, 70 on the treble, and the nut was high, the neck was straight, and we went from 10s to 11s. So there's the rub. That's why the setup, because if you think 80 to 70 thousandths, that's not bad, especially for a Gretsch type guitar. I mean, that's pretty good. And so I also, when I was tightening the tuners, which I always do, I noticed one of those washers was cracked. The little plastic washers in between the tuner button. And so replaced that. And I glued the nut, and I lubed the Bigsby, and I did all the standard stuff, including, really stretching those strings. So yeah, that was the Gretsch Electromatic. I had a Kiesel come into the shop and come into my bench. Now, Kiesel is another San Diego company, and they are associated historically with Carvin. So Kiesel was, though, the main driving force, and I believe... this is just going off just my common knowledge, so it might not be so accurate, and you can look it up for yourself. But Carvin is, I think it's like a made up name, and it's a combination of the two guys, the two founders. And so, but Kiesel, was always the main owner of the, of Carvin. So back in the day, Carvin did, anything from mixers, a lot of amps and guitars. They even sold microphones and other miscellaneous stuff, a big instrument company in San Diego, but they disbanded. Actually, what's weird is you can still buy Carvin amps online, I do believe. So I think that was one of the main issues between the two, business partners, is one wanted to focus on amps and one wanted to focus on guitars. And the old Carvins are great, but the newer stuff, I believe, was made overseas. And back in the day, I used to work at a rehearsal studio, and it was I'd say the premier rehearsal studio in San Diego, still is, and it had like 16 rooms. And, we had Ampeg and Marshall, but we had for bass, a lot of Carvin for bass. And, but a practice space is like the ultimate test of abuse, right? People are cranking it and stuff. But I also, in high school, our amps were Carvin, at least the bass amp. Again, a lot of bass centric stuff there with Carvin. And, it would always be in the shop getting worked on. The same at my studio. So the amps, at least the overseas ones, always had kind of issues. I think they were great. They sounded good. They just weren't really meant to stand up, to the rigors of the road. And so anyway, that brings me back to Kiesel. Kiesel is just guitars now. But, when you hear the word Kiesel, think Carvin, because that's essentially, he was just picking up where he had left off from Carvin. And so Kiesel guitars are beautiful. They're mostly meant for, like shredders and metal and experimental stuff. That's just the, mostly the vibe I see with it. Certainly you could play any kind of music on any kind of guitar. But this one was in for a setup. He went from like drop C. He just wanted to go standard with 10s. And I set it up, and it seemed okay. And he brought it back about an hour later and said that the bridge, which it wasn't a Floyd, but it could go up or down. The cavity was, had space for the bridge to go back. And he said when he put the bar in that it was grinding against something. Now, so during the process of the setup, you do adjust where, basically the block in the back of the bridge is going to move from one spot to another in the cavity, depending on how much you adjust the tension on the springs and where the claw is, etc. So it was okay when you pull down on it. It's when you go the opposite way. When you pull up on it, which I didn't do, it was rubbing. And so Anyways, so I say, okay, let's unscrew the back. So we unscrewed the back, and the block was rubbing, and you could see where the paint had been removed inside the cavity. And so, yeah, I got a fishtail gouge out, and I removed some of that material, but it still wasn't enough. And ultimately, it had to be routed out quite a bit. And I was lucky that when I put the back plate back on it, you couldn't see the material that was moved. It was all good, and he was happy that it just moved freely. But yeah, that guitar should be able to take 10s in standard tuning without it rubbing like that. But that's why you bring it to the shop to get that stuff sorted out. And, I pride myself on, if there's any kind of issue, just bring it back and we'll take care of you, and that's the relationship that we build with customers. So that was the Kiesel. And I had a high school friend bring me his childhood Strat. Now, this is crazy because both the customer and his brother are musicians, great musicians, and they were some of the first punks that I ever saw in middle school. And I'm pretty sure that when I was like 13 or, young, that I probably saw him play this guitar. And all these years later, like 20 years later, I'm repairing it and setting it up. So was pretty freaking cool. Customer is the nicest guy. So it's his childhood Strat, made in Mexico, early 2000s. So not Black Label. I think it was the silver one. And it just kind of needed one of everything. The pickups were loose. They had no screws to attach them to the pickguard. He wanted a different pickguard. He wanted a black one. It was a black guitar, so he wanted a black pickguard, but leave the white pickup rings, the white switch tip, the white knobs. So I thought it was a cool look, tuxedo. I think it's pretty good look. So we went ahead and put on the black guard, and I secured the pickups. While you're in there, this is stuff that I think about. Might as well spray out the pots and spray out the switch. Make sure everything is grounded correctly. There's no corrosion. That's just an extra check that you should do if you have the chance, if the opportunity presents itself. And it did. So I did all that. I think I even put a 16 thousandths shim in the neck. I know that's kind of a weird number. Why not 15? I have these little Altoid containers, the tins, and I put all kinds of different shim material in there. So sometimes pickups and other things will come in this molded clear plastic. And so I'll cut it out into strips and I'll gauge it out with my calipers. So I have a bunch of this hard plastic, and it's almost like Mylar, but it's 16 thousandths thick. So that's kind of my first 10. Sometimes that's like barely anything. So I at least go with like the 16 first. And then if that doesn't work, I'll go up to the, 20 and then 30, etc. So that solved it and set the intonation, and he got it back, and he was going to the recording studio that day, the day he picked it up, and he tagged me on Instagram, and the guitar was on the sofa there at the recording studio. Super cool moment to get that guitar up and rocking for him. And the last one I had on my bench, now check this out. It's a Gibson Les Paul. I think it's a classic. Can't beat a classic, right? It's an absolute classic. And the customer wanted no three-way switch. And so he said he hit it. When he plays, he hits the switch. I can relate 100% from playing Gretsch's most of my life, which also they have two switches on the upper bow, which can be kind of precarious. I know Setzer actually removed the far away one, and he has the switch closer to him, probably because he uses it a lot. But so he didn't want it because he hits it, and I noticed that about my Les Paul too. The switch is in the way. In fact, my Les Paul is it doesn't have a switch, and it just has one pickup and one knob. It's a 78 custom. So there you go. So I understood what he was saying. And something else I understood is he wanted the knob placement different. So the volume knob closest to you is the neck. Now that doesn't make sense because it's the knob closest to the bridge pickup. You think it would be the bridge, right? That's always been really confusing for me. So he wants the knob closest to your hand when you're closest to the bridge pickup to be the bridge. And then he wants the far away one, which if you look at it, it's at a slant and it's kind of pointing towards the neck. He wants that one to be the neck, which makes sense. And I know you're thinking, well, there's no three-way switch. How do you bounce between pickups? Well, the answer is you don't. It kind of operates like a jazz bass. So the two volumes are a blend. So he can create a custom blend with those knobs, or I have a sneaking suspicion, it looks like he plays rock and roll, that he's probably just going to turn the neck down and be on the bridge. That's what I would do. So that was a good solution for him, and that's still in the works. That's not quite done, but I'll button it up when I'm at work tomorrow. And that leads me to some interesting customer stories. So we had a guy, he called in about wanting his action lowered on his classical guitar. And he was talking to one of the techs. I was just over, I was like eavesdropping as I was working. And he said he wanted to, the action was super high and it was a nice classical, no truss rod. And he suggested removing an 1/8 inch off of the fingerboard to make the action lower. And the tech on the phone was trying to tell him, well, I don't understand that. If anything, that would make the action higher, essentially, if you're removing, And so he hung up with the phone and said, can you believe that guy? And I said, what did he want? He wanted to remove fingerboard material, and that's going to make the action somehow lower. And he said, yeah. And so I didn't get it, And then he came in, and a different tech, and again, I'm eavesdropping again, comes up to him in person now. And I hear him say the exact same thing he told the other guy on the phone, but now in person. And my colleague said, I don't understand how that's going to work. You're going to want to reset the neck because the neck is at a bad angle, which is very standard for a lot of these classical guitars, especially because that's how the tone works. That gives you the best tone, is that high action and that kind of that cant of the neck. But it had a Spanish heel, so you can't easily, if at all, reset that neck. So, but then there was some clarity. So it's one thing when customers try to tell you something on the phone. It's also one thing when customers try to tell you something at all, because, you're the expert supposedly, and they're taking it to you, but they don't want to hear what you have to say. They want to tell you what to do, which in the past has backfired because you'll do what the customer wants and they're not happy. And when it doesn't turn out right and you tried to tell them, but you're the one that did the work. See, so it's a slippery slope. But in the end, what he wanted was to take that 1/8 inch just in the cowboy chord area. And then, this is the key part, he wanted to drop the nut slot. So you lower the nut. And so that's still going to leave the action high on the upper board. He didn't seem to care about that, though. So I didn't want to do it. Two of my colleagues didn't want to do it, but my veteran colleague did want to do it. He said, "Oh yeah, okay, yeah, we'll do it." So that's in the works. And this other story goes back to that 59 330 TD. So it got brought in, and the owner is selling it on behalf of somebody else, but the owner also brought in his friend, who is an aficionado when it comes, quote unquote, when it comes to vintage guitars. And the owner doesn't seem to know much about it. He's a guitar player, real cool cat, but his buddy is kind of like a know-it-all. And does he know it all, is the thing. And so he's an older gentleman. I'd put him at, 65, maybe both of them. There's nothing wrong with that, just trying to paint a picture. And so I'm looking at it, and the owner of the shop is looking at it, and we're trying to come up with a price because they're going to sell it. We're going to put it on consignment. And, the know-it-all guy has a list of things. He took the pickups out, and when he said that, I instantly looked at the back of the P90 and it wasn't seated all the way. So I'm thinking, oh, okay. So he made a list of everything that was original and not original. He said the pick guard is not original, and he said the case isn't original, which obviously, yeah, it definitely wasn't a Gibson case, TKL or something. And then the owner of the shop, my colleague, pointed out the tuners, which wasn't on his list. And he said, why do you say that? Why do you say the tuners are replaced? Now, and my colleague said, well, you could see the ghosting of where the old ones were. And you definitely could. And he's, like that. And then I pointed out that you could see where the nibs were. So I said that it had been refretted, and he said, this guitar didn't have nibs. These models didn't come with nibs. And so I said, at this point, I'm very polite because I'm always learning, And so, but, my eyes, I just got them tested, 20/20, man. So I said, I pointed and I said, but look, you can see it. You can see where those nubs were. And I'm a tech, and when you do a refret, most of the times the customers are cool with the nibs disappearing because it is hard to preserve them, very hard. And I've seen people even rebind and redo the nibs. And I myself, on my 78 Custom, it was re-necked. Back in the day, you could buy, I'm talking 70s, could buy a neck and re-neck a Les Paul when you had a headstock break. So that's what was done to this one, but the binding was tall, and I had to create the nibs by scraping. So I understand about nibs, and I understand why they need to disappear. And I could see the frets weren't standard, 70s wide and low. They looked like 6105s or something. So, but interestingly enough, they were inlaid. So the frets, even though the nibs were gone, the frets kind of stopped short versus going all the way over the binding. So definitely have been refretted. And so he disagreed with me on the nubs. And I also pointed out that a volume knob looked different than the rest. And by different, I mean one of them looked original and the other three looked crystal clear. And he said, the know-it-all guy said, well, knobs are knobs. And, so no, they're not. When you're talking about a 59 330, everything matters. I could have told him when he said the pick guard was not original, I could have said, oh, it's just a pick guard. You know what I mean? It's I think it's a general attitude with I don't know, it's some people just trying to know everything. Maybe it's ego and pride. I'm in the learning mode constantly, and I think that's an advantage when you're a repair person. But anyways, my point was not that it's easy to replace the knobs, but that it had one original and three replaced. And the tuners, as my colleague pointed out, were replaced. So were the ferrules on the top. And so anyways, we're just kind of looking at this guitar, and it's fun for me because when I first started out and I was looking at a guitar, I remember people that were more experienced than me looking at it and pointing out little things that I didn't notice. And I used to think, wow, they're really, they really know their stuff. And I'll tell you, if you're working on getting better at spotting stuff, you will get better at it. And it's always good just to learn and ask questions. And this is just my take, but I don't come across like I know it all, even though I felt like I was right about the nibs. And but then but the owner himself, he had a little piece of paper, and he was actually writing down what I said too, which is funny. He was writing down what everybody said because we're trying to value the guitar. That was the point of looking at it and talking about it. It wasn't really about who knows more. It was about we're trying to get the most for it, and we're trying to value it come with an accurate pricing for this item. So anyways, they left, and we continued to research it, and we're coming up with the price. And I showed it to a friend of the shop. Actually, he used to work at the shop, and this guy is a killer country player, man, killer. And he's got a lot of killer guitars, and the nicest guy you'll ever meet. Anyways, I showed him it, and I told him the nib story, and he said, oh yeah, he said it definitely had nibs. And I said, how do you know? And he said, because I was there. I love that. He was, I don't know, a teenager in 59 or I don't know what age he was. Maybe that puts him too old now. Maybe he was younger, but he knows. He was there, and he knew that it had nibs. So I was right. And if I'm not right, and if you're following and you have information why, feel free to send me an email at allguitarsbuzz@gmail.com. I'd love to hear why and learn more about it. So those are my funny customer stories, some marketplace stuff. That Cordoba that I fixed up, I have some interest. I took some really great pictures, and there's a tunnel that I went to where the lighting is just perfect. You have like that golden hour lighting like all day long. I took some killer pictures of it. I showed the repairs, and in the description, I put the hole on the top has been plugged. I said the top crack has been glued and cleated. There's a fresh 9-volt battery. All the electronics sprayed out, and it's got Salvarez hard tension on it. And then I even had a video in the listing of me playing it for 30 seconds. And today someone messaged me and said they're interested in checking it out tomorrow. I'm going to get back to them right after this and say, sounds good. So yeah, my hard work might be paying off. Someone else hit me up about some I have like this stereo amp, this vintage stereo amp chassis, and I'm asking 100, and it's kind of a rare one, and you can only find information about it in like the audio museum online, And so some guy offered me 75, and I want 100, and I didn't even answer, because it's like, if you want it, you'll pay 100 for it. The transformers, if I bother to look them up, they're at least 30 a transformer, and there's like 2 or 3 transformers. But if I look them up, that might be, maybe it's been swapped out. Maybe it's a Fender black panel era transformer. Maybe it's worth a lot more. It has the original Jewelite, which is white. It's like a white Jewelite, but it's relicked and aged in just the right way. And if anything, man, that Jewelite's probably worth about $30. And then there's the chassis itself. And so yeah, come on, come on. That video that I'm doing on the X Series Martin from my cousin Steven, I'm still working on editing that thing. I just did the voiceover before I did this podcast. So yeah, that should drop soon. I'm going to try to drop it before I drop this. So just consider it out. Check it up. Check it out on my YouTube channel at Hillington Guitars. No space in that. Guitars plural, at Hillington Guitars, and you will see that. And yeah, if you want to come out and see me play, please do. And if you want to contact me for any reason, you know how. Thank you all for listening. This is a little shorter episode, more in the 40-minute mark, but I'm really enjoying doing these podcasts, and I hope to keep doing it for as long as I can. So until next time, see ya later.